She screamed as something wrapped around her throat, dragging her up the stairs. Heels scraping wood, nails clawing carpet, and no one was there. This wasn't a ghost story whispered over drinks. It was witnessed. Police, neighbors, friends, they saw a violent haunting unfold in real time. They called it Fred. The papers called it Mr. Nobody. But the world came to know it as the Black Monk of Pontefract, Britain's most violent haunting. For years, it waged war against the Pritchards, slapping, choking, throwing, tormenting, each attack bolder than the last. When they fled, it stayed. And like any war, it had battles, counterattacks, and casualties. Today, investigators still walk the 30 East Drive. They hear footsteps. They see the shadow in the hood. Tonight, I'm taking you inside that house. From the first night it made itself known to the last night the Pritchards ever slept there. And if the stories are true, it isn't finished. Welcome to Project Strangeville. Sarah Pritchard looked over her shoulder and froze. From midair, not the ceiling, not a shelf, chalk dust was pouring down in a slow, steady stream. It drifted like smoke, coating the kitchen counter and the pale linoleum floor beneath her feet. She stepped closer. No hole above her, no bag spilling over, just dust, appearing from nowhere. Sarah lived here with her son Joe, his wife Jean, and their 2 children, 15-year-old Philip and 12-year-old Diane. They'd only been in this house a few days. It was nothing fancy, a brick council house on East Drive in Pontefract, Yorkshire. A quiet street in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where people left doors unlocked and bad news rarely knocked. Sarah reached for a rag and wiped the counters clean. The dust stopped. She told herself it had to be plaster from a crack she couldn't see. Then the water came. Pools of it, spreading across the kitchen floor. She mopped them up. They came right back. She mopped again. They came back again. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just a mess. This wasn't normal. Jean had been working in the back garden. When she returned to the kitchen, it looked like the aftermath of some unexplained accident. Dust clinging to the edges of the counter. Water creeping back across the linoleum. Jean stepped inside, stopping mid-step, as if the air in the kitchen had turned heavier. That's when the noises started. Loud bangs from inside the walls. Heavy thuds upstairs. The ceiling light flickering on and off. Philip wandered in, curious, and the cupboard door beside him swung open, then slammed shut so hard it rattled the shelves. Jean's first thought wasn't ghost. It was someone's in the house. She searched every room. Every door was locked. Every window was shut. No intruder, no explanation, just the water, the noise, and the feeling that someone, or something, was in here with them. That night, it would make sure they knew exactly how close it could get. When Sarah saw that the dust was hanging in the air, she didn't think she was seeing the start of a haunting. You never do. The first time, you tell yourself it's the house settling. The second time, you tell yourself it's nothing. Sarah convinced herself that it was odd, but nothing to be concerned about. But what if it isn't? What if something is watching you in your own home? Did you ever get that feeling like something is watching you from a shadow in your house? That's where it starts. Not with big, terrifying moments, but with the quiet, almost forgettable ones. The ones that get under your skin and stay there. And once it's in your head, you can't unthink it. Night fell, but the house didn't rest. Philip had just gone to his room when the first bang shook the walls. Then another. Then 3 in a row. Sharp, deliberate, like fists pounding from the inside of the plaster. Jean stepped into the hallway, heart already in her throat. The ceiling light above her flicked off, plunging her into the shadow, then blazed back on. From the kitchen came the sound of dripping. She found fresh puddles on the linoleum, bigger than before, water spreading towards her feet. Jean reached for a towel, but stopped mid-bend. The air had changed. Cold, sharp, electric. The kind of chill that tells you you're not alone. Footsteps pounded overhead, then a crash from the living room, loud enough to make her flinch. Philip ran in, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. He started to speak, and the cupboard door beside him swung open, then slammed shut. He jumped back, but before he could move away, something invisible struck him across the face. A single, violent slap that whipped his head to the side. Philip froze, one hand pressed to his reddening cheek, eyes glassy with shock. Jean's pulse spiked. She reached for him, scanning the empty room around him like a mother searching for a threat she couldn't see. Her voice shook as she called next door. Within minutes, the neighbor, Reen Kell, stood in the doorway. She didn't get more than a few words out before her gaze locked on a heavy sideboard across the room and watched it scrape across the carpet, sliding away from the wall with a slow, grinding sound. Her mouth went dry. She said nothing. No one touched it. No one could explain it. And no one in that room doubted what they'd just seen. The next witness would wear a badge, and even they wouldn't walk away a skeptic. You ever been in a room when something weird happens, and everyone sees it at the same time? Everyone just freezes and stares at each other, waiting for someone to make sense of the situation. Philip was paralyzed when that thing hit him, by fear and surprise all at once. He just stood there, frozen. What would you do if you were him? And Jean? She went into that instinct every parent has. Find the threat, protect the kid. Only there was nothing to grab, nothing to fight. What do you do when something's beating the hell out of you and you can't fight back? If that thought ever gets in your head, you'll never feel safe in your own home again. If this is already making you think about the dark corners in your house, like this video and subscribe, because they're about to get the police involved. When Jean called the police, she wasn't asking them to arrest a ghost. She just wanted someone in uniform to tell her she wasn't losing her mind. Constable Ian Sharp arrived within the hour. He stepped into 30 East Drive expecting to calm a nervous family, maybe fill out a report and move on. Jean led him straight into the living room, where Philip sat pale and silent, and their neighbor, Reen, stood against the wall. At first, nothing. The room was still, almost too still. Then the light overhead began to sway, slow at first, then harder, until the bulb tapped against its glass shade. A low, deliberate bang came from inside the wall to Sharp's left, another from behind him, and then the sideboard. A heavy piece of furniture that usually took 2 men to move scraped across the carpet, sliding away from the wall with a slow grind. The constable's pen froze over his notepad. His jaw clenched, just enough for Jean to notice. "All right," he muttered. "I saw that. But there was nothing to arrest. No one to chase. No crime to record. Just a room full of people staring at the same impossible thing." Sharp logged the report, signed his name, and left. And when the patrol car door slammed outside, Jean realized something far worse than having no answers. They were on their own. And when it finally chose its favorite target, things would get violent. You ever put your faith in someone thinking they'll make it better, and then watch that hope collapse right in front of you? Would you call the police if it was happening to you? Jean thought the police could make it stop. Instead, all she got was a signature on a piece of paper. What does it do to you when the people who are supposed to protect you admit that they can't? That's when the family learned the truth. It wasn't just them against something unseen. It was them alone in a war they couldn't walk away from. Every night from then on wasn't just survival. It was another round in the siege they never signed up for. The activity didn't stop. If anything, it grew sharper, more deliberate, and soon it chose a favorite target, Diane. At first, it tugged at her hair, little pulls when no one was near. Then came scratches down her arms, red marks that stung like burns, appearing in front of witnesses. One night, when the family sat in the living room, a heavy chair rocked forward and toppled on top of her. and pinned her to the carpet. Joe and Philip rushed to pull it off, straining against weight that should have been easy to lift. When they finally freed her, Diane's face was pale, her breath ragged, eyes darting around the empty air. It wasn't random anymore. It had chosen her, and every time it touched her, it seemed to grow bolder. Witnesses, neighbors, friends saw it happen too. Furniture pinning Diane down, her hair yanked, her body shoved to the floor. The family could no longer tell themselves it was tricks of the house, or stress, or imagination. It was hurting her, and when it finally showed itself, the family would learn the face behind the attacks. You ever been singled out at school, at work, anywhere? That feeling when someone decides you're the one they're coming after? Now imagine that someone isn't a bully or a boss. It's something you can't see. And every time it touches you, it gets stronger. Now imagine you're Jean and Joe, and something is literally beating on your daughter, and you can't stop it. What would you do? How would you fight back? How do you even breathe knowing you're the target? That's what Diane was living with. And if it ever chose you, what part of your life would it take first? It was one thing to be shoved, scratched, and pinned down by something you couldn't see, but then it decided to show itself. The family began catching glimpses, a dark shape, always at the edge of vision, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes on the landing. Once, Jean swore she saw it standing just inside her bedroom, watching. Witnesses described the same thing, a hooded figure, tall and broad. The outline of a robe, heavy and dark, like a monk in a shadow. Its face hidden. In 30 East Drive, the family had already named it Fred. But when neighbors, journalists, and historians began connecting the sightings to a monk hanged centuries earlier, Fred got a darker name, one that stuck, the Black Monk of Pontefract. And that's when it stopped lurking and started attacking in full view. You ever wake up certain that someone's in the room with you, only to realize you're alone? What if you weren't wrong? What if one night you finally turned your head and something was there? Not a dream, not a shadow, something standing where no one should be. That's what the Pritchards faced. When it finally looked back at them, was it still just the house, or was it someone? Once you've seen that, how do you ever trust a dark hallway again? It had scratched her, pulled her hair, pinned her under furniture, but one night, it went further. Diane was on the staircase when she felt it. Something wrapped around her throat, invisible but solid. She screamed as her body jerked forward, dragged up the stairs by nothing anyone could see. Her heels scraped wood. Her nails clawed at the carpet. Her family lunged after her, shouting her name. Joe grabbed her legs. Jean clawed at her shoulders, pulling with everything she had. But Diane's body just kept rising, lifted by the throat, her face turning red, eyes widening with panic. For a sickening moment, it looked like she was going to be carried all the way into the darkness above. Then, it stopped. Diane collapsed into her parents' arms, gasping for breath, her skin marked by angry red lines across her neck. The family stood frozen, the silence broken only by Diane's sobs. They had seen enough to know the truth. It wasn't just throwing things anymore. It wasn't just pushing and scratching or scaring. It wanted to kill her. So the family called in the church. But what walked into 30 East Drive that day wasn't ready for the war that was waiting inside. You ever been so scared you can't breathe? That's what Diane felt. And it wasn't from a panic attack. It was from something nobody could see wrapping its fingers around her throat. And there was absolutely nothing her parents could do to stop it. Could you imagine how they must have felt at that moment? I don't care if I have to sleep on the street with my family. I wouldn't stay another minute in that house. That wasn't just an attack. That was a message. And the message was clear. It wanted blood. By now, the Pritchards knew they couldn't fight it alone, so they called in the church. A priest entered 30 East Drive, armed with holy water, crucifixes, and prayers. For the first time, The family felt like they weren't just defending themselves, they were striking back, but the house fought back harder. As the priest prayed, the walls shook with pounding, loud and mocking, like fists slamming in rhythm with his words. A crucifix tore itself from the wall and clattered across the floor. Holy water splashed back onto the priest's face, as if thrown by invisible hands. And then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace, but like something is waiting. The priest gathered his things, shaken, and left. The family stared at the door after him, realizing the truth. Their first strike hadn't weakened it, it had only provoked it. And now, it would change tactics, turning their home into a twisted playground of fear. You ever pushed back against someone or something trying to intimidate you, only to have it push back even harder? That moment you realize this isn't going to go the way you thought it was? That's what this was. The family thought the church would be their secret weapon, the chance to take the fight to it. Instead, all they did was swing and miss. Would you have followed the priest out the door? This was their counterattack, their first strike in a war that had already claimed their home. After the priest left, the house went quiet, but the family knew better than to mistake silence for peace. It was planning, and soon, it changed tactics. Furniture began to appear in impossible arrangements. Chairs stacked on tables, heavy dressers tipped but never falling, as if to remind the family that every inch of the house belonged to it. Family photos were found slashed. On the wall above the staircase, one message stood out, scrawled in crude, jagged letters, like it had been carved with a nail, was a single word: die. The Pritchards swore no one in the family wrote it, and when the neighbors saw it for themselves, they went pale. It wasn't just random vandalism, it was a threat. The house wasn't just haunted anymore, it was hostile. Neighbors who came inside felt it too, a pressure in the air, an anger that seeped into every corner. And for the Pritchards, every new morning carried the same question: what would it do next? They wouldn't have to wonder long, because the final assault was coming. Have you ever witnessed paranormal activity? Not in whispers, but in scratches on your photos and messages on your walls, and the way your furniture is rearranged to remind you that you're not alone anymore? That's what the Pritchards were dealing with. Not just attacks, but intimidation. What do you do in your home? The one place that's supposed to be your safe haven becomes the weapon used against you. It was like it wanted them gone, and when they didn't take the hint, it escalated, and once again, Diane would take the brunt of it. By the winter of 1969, the house felt less like a home and more like a battlefield. Every night brought pounding in the walls, objects hurled across rooms, and voices whispering where no one stood. The family had grown used to bruises, scratches, and fear, but the worst was still waiting. One night, Diane was yanked to the floor again, her hair twisted in invisible hands, her body dragged across the carpet. When Joe rushed to free her, a heavy chest of drawers toppled forward, nearly missing them both. Bang after bang rattled the walls until it felt like the entire house was collapsing. Objects rained down from shelves. The air shook with the violence of it. And then, in the middle of the chaos, silence. Diane lay trembling in her father's arms. Jean stood, frozen, heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't just another night of torment. It was a warning. Stay here, and it would kill them. The Pritchards didn't need another sign. They began making plans to leave 30 East Drive. But leaving didn't end the war, because it never left with them. You ever hit that breaking point where you say, that's it, I'm done? Where there is no reasoning, explaining, or anything that's going to sway you? Every bruise, every scream, every shattered night was another wound in a war no one outside their walls could see. And the Pritchards were done. Noises, furniture moving, chalk dust is all fine and dandy, but when it's physically attacking your children, it's time to go. I might not even grab my stuff, I might just leave. That's where the Pritchards were. They weren't asking if it was real anymore. They weren't hoping for help. They were just trying to live long enough to get out. And here's the hardest truth. Sometimes the only way to survive a war like this is to retreat. But retreat doesn't end a war. It just means the fight waits for someone else. The Pritchards finally escaped 30 East Drive, but the Black Monk didn't leave with them. In the years since, new tenants, investigators, and thrill seekers have all walked through that door, and many of them say the same things the Pritchards did. Furniture moves on its own, cold spots bloom in empty rooms, footsteps echo on the staircase when no one is there, and sometimes people claim they see him, the hooded figure standing silent in the shadows. Some say it's just legend now, a story kept alive by fear. Others swear the house is still dangerous, that the Black Monk never left, waiting for who's ever foolish enough to stay too long. The Pritchards survived by leaving, but the house is still there, and so is he. The Black Monk of Pontefract remains one of the most violent hauntings in Britain's history. The Pritchards escaped, but the war never ended. And if you ever step inside 30 East Drive, don't be surprised if he's there waiting for you.